So here's your facts on the debt ceiling. The presidents, the funny senators, number one Reagan, number two W, and the largest percentage increases. The entire Republican Party.
Okay. Everybody ready? Ready to start? Good. I have people on Zoom. Thank you for coming in person and on Zoom. So I think with the 27 homes zooming in, times that by 2, plus we have about 50 or 60 people here. So that's a good showing for tonight on a Sunday.
Given who it is.
Given who it is, that's true.
You got 2 people, it's surprising. You don't want to know.
So everybody, without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Robert Watson. And we're glad that he can come here in person on a Sunday night instead of doing our Sunday at home lecture. He's here in person. Okay, and he's gonna stay within the limits.
I don't know about that.
And he's gonna speak into the microphone.
Okay, 1, 2.
Always keep it to your mouth.
I will. I'm nice and loud.
All right.
Tammy, thank you. Good to see everybody. Everybody all right? Yeah. Despite the debt ceiling and climate change and the Ukraine and everything else, right? Indictments and Tammy, thanks. I love working with Tammy and love coming out here. Anybody not know me? So I need to do an introduction. Everybody knows me and you're here and you're talking to me. What the heck, right? So anyway, this is book number 47. I got my copy on Monday. So it still has the new car smell, still warm. It's shipped from the warehouse this week. I got the first advanced copy. So it just shipped this week. So my guess is last Monday. So probably by Friday, it's on Amazon would be my guess. So it just came out, book number 47. So here's the backstory on writing the book. It's bizarre. So I try to write a book a year, and I've done that for my entire career, 32 years as a professor. Some years I write 2 books. So the pandemic hit us in March of 2020, right? And I was scheduled to give a speech at a synagogue in Boynton Beach for the Shabbat service. I was going to do a program all on the Holocaust. The rabbi called me and said, you know, with COVID now, this week, you're going to come in and it's just going to be you, me, and a tech, and we're going to do it on Zoom. And everybody's like, what's Zoom, right? And we all should have bought stock, right? So I said, yeah, that's fine. He said, my congregation will stay home. So I'm sitting at an intersection on Boynton Beach Boulevard, and to my left is a white Lexus SUV with a couple around 30 years old and a little 1 or 2 year old in the back seat. I look over at the 1 or 2 year old and a little kid starts making faces at me. So I start making faces back and he starts going crazy things. So I'm going like monsters and and I had 2 kids. So you do that kind of thing. Next thing I know, I woke up. There was a car going 100 miles an hour. They went through the traffic light. They hit my car, cut my car in half and sent it flipping. So I guess I was out about 5 minutes would be my guess. And I woke up and I'm upside down, the door's stuck, the bags are on, there's glass everywhere. I don't know what's going on. I'm like, oh my gosh. And my first thought was, uh-oh, my car would have smashed into where that little kid was. So I couldn't get out of my car. So I just smashed the door open and separated my shoulder doing it. And I crawled out of the car and I saw their car was sideways in the intersection and another car, blah, 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 blah. So the police and fire come running over and there were 3 ambulances. One happily took the couple and the kid away and they were fine. They said, yeah, they're all fine. Now, my car flipped and hit theirs and then bounced off of it. Fortunately, I had a little hybrid. They had a big SUV. So they were all fine. The driver died. They took her away. So then the police officer and EMT said, you got to get in the 3rd ambulance. I said, no, I have a speech to give. And they said, get in the ambulance. I said, you don't know me, right? I have a speech to give, right? Doing the Shabbat service at Temple, I think it was Sherei Shalom. They're like, no, you got to get, and then they're kind of laughing like, you're insane, buddy. Now get the F in the ambulance. I said, I'm going to tell you a story, gentlemen. It's a story about Teddy Roosevelt in 1912. He's campaigning, you got it, you knew it, you know me. He's campaigning for president, and he's shot in the chest at point blank range by a would-be assassin. However, he has a glass case for those little pinch glasses he wear, glass case, and they would always have about a 100-page speech, which he would take out, put on the podium, and then forget to ever look at. And he would roar for 2 hours, right? Fortunately, the speech and the glass case prevented the bullet from going through him. It hit his chest, and it was covered in blood. Teddy Roosevelt is knocked down, shot in the chest. He refuses medical attention because he's going to give a speech. So he gets up and he delivers about the best line in presidential history. Teddy Roosevelt was a gifted orator. Think of Martin Luther King on steroids. You know, he would roar like a lion for 2 hours. Teddy Roosevelt gets up, and in the best introduction ever, he says to the audience, I don't know if you've heard or not, but you'll have to forgive me because I've just been shot in the chest. How's that for an attention grabber? And then he opens up his jacket and his shirt's all bloody. The shirt still survives with blood on it in a museum. And then he delivers the line. He says, quote unquote, of course, it's going to take more than a single bullet to bring down a bull moose. And he gives his speech, which is amazing. So I told the police and the EMTs that, and they're looking at me like, are you mad? And I said to them, I said, moral of the story, it's going to take more than a single drunk driver to bring down this bull moose. And I said, you got two choices, gentlemen. I'm going to walk the rest of the way to the speech, or you can drop me off. And they just gave up and dropped me off. So I walked in and went up to the bima, and the rabbi and the tech person looked like they saw a ghost. And I walked in and I'm like, I can do this. And about 2 minutes into my introduction, I had broken my left ankle and my right shin. My whole hip was out of alignment, dislocated the right shoulder, separated left shoulder. I'm sitting, the adrenaline wore off. And I grabbed the beam. I'm like, I'm going to fall over. And I looked down, there's blood everywhere. So I wiped my face and I got like glass falling out. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I don't remember what I said, but I'm like, thank you, everybody. Have a good day. I ended the speech. So I went home and it was COVID. And the university was closed, right? So everything was on Zoom. So I was sitting, I had just gone through a divorce, so 2 years ago. So 2.5, I guess it is now. So I was home by myself, and I couldn't lie down. I had to sleep sitting up. I had 2 slings on. I was, a mess. And I thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I'm somebody that I can't sit still. I literally can't sit. I'm the person that walks up and down the aisle on the plane all day. I pace around the room. I'm like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I thought, okay, I need to write a book. I contact the Library of Congress. The problem is I can't go there because I'm not allowed to walk for 2 months, right? The Library of Congress is closed. I'm like, oh my gosh, I call the National Archives, closed. Smithsonian, closed. Presidential libraries, closed. I'm like, this is like death to me, having to sit with nothing to do. So I'm thinking, I have to write a book. I've got to do something. And I thought, what if I found out when the first pandemic was? What happened? Are there any lessons? How did we respond politically? Did people get along? How did the medical community respond? I said, I'm going to write a book on the first pandemic. So I started to do my homework, and it wasn't the Spanish flu or influenza in 1918. It was in 1793, the first year of George Washington's second term in office. It was our first massive pandemic. The title of my book, America's First Plague, comes from all the newspapers, politicians. People called it the plague because it was so terrible and nobody knew what it was. So they called it the plague. So I thought, okay, good. I got my topic. So I went online, and there's a little bit online, not a lot. The good news is the bad news, and that is there's not books on it, which is bad news for the world, good news for me. So I could sort of, blaze new trails there. So I called, I emailed, and I wrote letters to the Library of Congress and the National Archives saying, here's some files, here's some folders. Some of it's available online. Most of it has not yet been digitized. Here's the good news. Most everything from history has been digitized. So I have a book about the British burning Washington, D.C. on August 24th, 1814. It comes out on August 1st. I wrote 2 books during the pandemic because I sat for a couple of months. So I was very productive. It's called When Washington Burned. I would say 85% of the documents, old newspapers, generals' letters, British war reports, it's all online. I did 85% of my research sitting at my laptop in my home with all my casts and slings and stuff on. Now, eventually I had to go to Washington to get the rest. So I contact the Library of Congress and all these groups, frantic. I need to get access. You're closed, but will you give me special permission? I'm not supposed to walk. I can't, but you know what? Screw it. I'm going to fly anyway. I'll get a wheelchair, you know. And finally, I get this call back from one of the archivists. He goes, "You are really insane." I'm like, "I'm just restless and I want to knock off a book." He says, "Listen, we're closed for the foreseeable future, but I come in every Friday." So I mailed him a box of dark chocolate Mac nuts, and he agreed every Friday to make 300 copies of war reports, medical records, the old newspapers. Matthew Clarkson was the mayor, his papers. Matthew Carey was the newspaper editor, his papers. Dr. Benjamin Rush, the famous physician, his papers. George Washington's papers, Hamilton's papers, Jefferson's. Now, a lot of those were digitized, but the stuff on this. So over the course of 2 months, he sent me a few thousand pages of primary sources, which I just sat in my living room and worked on 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, because there was nothing else to do. So that's the genesis of the book and the idea behind this book. Boom. Here's a description from Matthew Carey, who was the editor of the main newspaper in the capital city. The capital city then was Philadelphia, okay? What happened was when George Washington was inaugurated in 1789, in April, by the way, he was a month late. Can you imagine being a month late for your inaugural? And Martha was still late. She didn't get there in time. So they didn't know where to have an inauguration because there was no Washington, D.C. There were swamps, fields, right? Bogs, foggy bottom. So the deal was that New York City would serve as the interim capital for 1 year. George Washington was sworn in New York City. No one liked New York City. Unlike today, we all love New York City. Nobody liked it. Jefferson spoke for the Southerners, and he said, as best as I can tell, they have 10 months of winter, no fall and no spring. So they complained about, thank you, they complained about the weather. Fisher Ames from Massachusetts, he was kind of a Will Rogers type of politician, always funny. He said that New York City is nothing but quote unquote hogs, dogs, garbage. That's what he said. So everybody followed NYC. So they knew they would leave New York City. The plan was they would go to the most important, largest city in the country, Philadelphia, for 9 years. That would give them 10 years to build Washington, D.C. Now, everybody signed off on the deal because nobody thought George Washington could build the city. We were bankrupt. We didn't have any architects. We didn't have any builders. You know, it's a swamp. And George Washington's vision for the city, he wanted Rome. He wanted wide boulevards that looked like ancient Rome. He wanted buildings that had the feel of Athens, to channel Pericles, Socrates, and the fathers of democracy and Western thought. And people just nodded their head because it was George. Nobody thought it would happen. So Philadelphia was where it happened. Here's a description in the newspaper as it's happening. Those who ventured out had handkerchiefs or sponges or masks with vinegar. Now, you've seen the masks during the plague in the 1340s. It looks like a bird's beak, right? Sort of that Venetian, the Venice masks. What they did is they thought vinegar, the medical community thought vinegar neutralized bad air. So by having a bird beak, you dip a cloth in vinegar, put it at the end of the beak so you could still breathe and talk. Or vinegar with vinegar. Others carried pieces of tarred rope. So they thought that tar and gunpowder warded off evil spirits. So they put big barrels all around the city filled with tar and burned them 24/7. The city was covered in black tar and gunk. People tied ropes around their necks until a tar will contract, until one guy hanged himself inadvertently with a rope. The tar contracted, he couldn't get it off in time. Others wore camphor bags tied around their necks. Okay, own up. How many people had a mother or grandmother that told them to wear camphor bag? Yes, I'm getting lots of yeses. Yeah, sure. You're all about 34, 35. So yeah, back in the day, you won't remember, but about 70, 80, 90 years ago, everybody did this stuff still. My grandmother used camphor. So tied around their necks. People hastily shifted their course at the sight of a hearse coming towards them. Many never walked on the footpath, sidewalks, but went into the middle of the streets to avoid being infected in passing by houses wherein people had died. Acquaintances and friends avoided one another. Sound familiar? The old custom of shaking hands fell in such general disuse that many shrunk back with affright and even the offer of a hand. By the way, if anybody has kids, grandkids, nieces, nephews, we did the elbow. None of my students shake hands. It's all fist bumps or some kind of, yeah. So nobody shakes hands anymore. A person with a crepe, like a black mourning cloth, a person with a crepe or any appearance of mourning was shunned like a viper. Others refused to wear coverings and deemed the plague not real. Certain conservative politicians said it was fake. You ready for this? It's not real, it's a hoax. People actually believe that crap. So yeah, how about that? While political leaders and newspapers pointed fingers and passed along blame, anger at one another prevailed. This was just a mess. Now, the mayor of Philadelphia was very enlightened, and Philadelphia at the time had the nation's preeminent medical community. The first college of medicine, an organization of physicians. Of course, Ben Franklin was in the city. Philadelphia is the centerpiece of medicine. The mayor of Philadelphia, Mayor Clarkson, and George Washington asked the doctors what to do. So they put a committee together and studied it. And these were their recommendations. Back then, they didn't know what caused this particular disease. More on that in a moment. And there was no known cure. No vaccination, no known cure. They didn't know what caused it. So imagine the panic. The bubonic plague in the 1340s is estimated to have killed 1/3 of Europe. Can you imagine? And nobody knew what caused it. Nobody knew. So the panic, the chaos was off the charts. Ultimately, what they did during the bubonic plague, they blamed immigrants and they blamed Jews. Jews caused the plague. They poisoned the wells. What they found was the Jewish community had lower death rates than the non-Jewish community. We don't have accurate numbers, but it's 1/3 of the non-Jewish community, maybe 1/6, 1/8, 1/10 of the Jewish community. Why? Jews lived separately because they had to. Hygiene, kosher, wash their hands, blah, 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 blah. So they had lower rates. So imagine the panic back then. We saw the same panic here. So the medical community studied it. They made recommendations. Number one, wear masks. About half the public wore masks. The other half claimed it was their freedom to not wear a mask. They were asked, number two, socially distance. Can you believe it? They said, stay inside. Don't spread the disease. What did it? Half the people stayed inside. The others said it's all right to go out in the streets and do what we want. Conservative politicians said it's denying our freedom. They encouraged their supporters to take to the streets when they were asked to socially distance. Number three, they noticed that people that contracted the disease often were out at sunset. Now, they had no idea why. The disease ended up being caused by a mosquito, and they're active at sunset. So they had no idea why, but they realized more people were out at sunset that contracted the disease. So they said, please don't gather at sunset. So conservatives and preachers called all their congregations out at sunset to pray it away and in defiance of it. And a good portion of them ended up dying. So it was surreal. The two political parties fought over this, tooth and nail. In fact, the parties were basically factions. This disease was like a puzzle. There's many pieces of the puzzle, but one major piece of the puzzle that turned two factions into hardened political parties was this disease. And when the disease broke out in 1793, the factions were hardening. By the end of the disease, we had two political parties that were a mile apart. You had the Federalists. The Federalists were people like George Washington, John Adams, Alexander Hamilton, Ben Franklin, John Jay, mostly northern, a little better educated city residents. They believed in the disease. They advocated social distancing, masking, follow the medical community, so forth. Then you had the anti-Federalists, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Patrick Henry, Thomas Paine, mostly Southern, slave owners, rural, generally less educated with the notable exception of Jefferson and Madison. They didn't believe in the disease. They wouldn't listen to anything. They refused to wear masks. They refused to socially distance, and they blamed everybody and fought. So those are the two factions, and they turned into parties by the end of this mess, I'm sad to say. So the story, the genesis of this disease, the super spreader event, it's weird. It starts with something called the Bulama experiment. So Bulama, sometimes spelled with an O, is a small islet off the west coast of Africa, near Sierra Leone, Guinea-Bissau, that area, West Africa. There's an archipelago of 88 little islets. Some are the size of this community. Others a wee bit bigger, 88 of them. So Bulama is one of those little islands. So there's a group of missionaries, preachers, and social reformers who meet in London. And they have a really noble idea, and that is to try to end slavery. And they're going to come up with this Bulama experiment to end slavery. They're trying to figure out a way that they can end slavery other than just appealing to white slave owners or taking up arms. So here's their experiment. They said, we think, now by today's standards, this is unbelievably racist, unbelievably condescending, unbelievably colonial and imperialistic, but they thought they were social reformers. We think it's possible to teach the savages in Africa to wear clothing like us. We also think it's possible to teach them to eat with forks and to eat our food and to believe in our God, Jesus, all right? So what they're going to do is they bought one of these little islands, Bulama, sometimes spelled with a U, sometimes spelled with an O, and they're going to go to Bulama, get the locals, make them wear English clothing, pray to Jesus, and eat with spoons and forks. Then they can prove to the world that the Africans are civilized. Ergo, we should end slavery. That's their argument. Now, so they buy Bulama. Of course, nobody knows where it is. Nobody had ever been there. And they didn't ask the locals if they could buy the island from them. They just bought it. Then they sell tickets to board 3 ships. They board 3 ships. And they sell tickets to fund their mission. The promise is women will be able to vote in Bulama and on the ship. All people, even indentured servants, all people, those uneducated, the lower classes, will be on equal footing with the aristocrats that are leading the. This is going to be an unbelievable experiment. Now, they sold tickets, everybody boards. The problem was, who did they not include? They didn't bring soldiers, farmers, builders. It was 3 ships of English missionaries. Nobody knew how to plant, hunt, fight. Nobody knew the language. And they set sail, and they arrived in Bulama during the rainy season. Wearing English wool clothing, and nobody had any clue where they were going. Everything that could go wrong went wrong. First off, the ships were not allowed to leave English waters. Some of the ministers and lords in England were making money off of slavery. So the last thing they wanted to do was okay 3 ships to go to Africa to try to end slavery. So they revoked their ability to leave. They ended up having to set sail quietly in the middle of the night and sneak out of England. They get lost a number of times. One of the ships runs aground because the captains were missionaries that had a few years of sailing experience. Nobody knew where the hell they were going. As for sailing along the Mediterranean, one of the big problems in the late 1700s, piracy. Piracy was a huge problem. When we gained our independence from Britain, the Revolutionary War was spring of 1775 to fall of 1783. September is when it officially ended. When we gained our independence from the British, one of the biggest problems we had was piracy. Our ships throughout the Caribbean were just attacked mercilessly. When we were part of Britain, who had the most powerful navy in the world for at least a century? The British. Now we're on our own. We had 6 warships. So piracy was a big problem. They're sailing through the Mediterranean, the Pillars of Hercules, a hotbed of piracy off the African coast. Plus, Britain's almost at war with France and Spain. So you have Spanish, French, and pirates hunting it. They're sailing right into this mess. They notice a couple people get sick on the ship. There was some disease on the ship. It would not be the disease that wipes everybody out and becomes the super spreader event of the 18th century. So people are getting sick of the disease. They're not sure why. Everybody panics, so they get the people with the disease and they throw them overboard. Then the wealthy folks running it announced that thing about women, you all get rights and you get to vote. No, we're going to rescind that. By the way, everybody gets equal. No, we're making all the decisions. We're taking all the land. So it was, they gave up on that a couple days at sea. So there's the actual certificate and the argument to the Bologna experiment. There's the location. Again, 88 little islets just off the coast of Guinea-Bissau, Senegal, Sierra Leone, Guinea. So it's this tiny little island. You can see it's only about 10 miles. So small little island. The 3 ships were the Calypso, the Beggar's Benson, and the Henke. You're looking at the Henke. That's the main ship. The Henke would be the ship of death. It would be the 18th century super spreader event that brought disease all around the world and killed millions and millions of people before it decimated the United States and our own capital city. So that's the Henke. She was, as far as ships go, a decent ship. Not real big, but you can see a couple of decks, 3 main masts, multiple sails, bowsprits, and so on. A reasonable ship. It's just that nobody knew how to sail. The captain kept getting lost and ran it aground. So they somehow, in 1792, avoid all the pirates, the Spanish and the French. Somehow, they make it to Africa. There's Bologna. There it is on the right today. They don't have running water in most places. They don't have electricity. There's no public sanitation service, no sewage system. Everybody's illiterate. It is a hellhole. It was a hellhole then. It's a hellhole now, tragically. That's what a present picture. It probably looked about like that when they arrived. So they probably picked the most inhospitable piece of land imaginable. And of course, as I said, they arrive in the hot, rainy season, wearing English clothing, trying to plant English type of crops. In the bottom of the ship, they had sheep, cows, pigs, chickens, who don't do so well in that kind of environment. So they finally arrived in Bologna. Now, they had a warning. There was an old sailor's curse, a saying about Benin, that area, Benin, Bologna, Bissau. Here's the old sailor saying at the top: beware and take care of the bite of Benin. For the one that comes out, there are 40 that go in. So sailors knew that anybody that went there died. The rumor was that the locals were cannibals and they ate everybody and they have a taste for European flesh. That's what they were told. God will protect us. We're going to sail in. So they sailed into Bologna. And on the left, that's Captain Philip Beaver, who's in charge. On the right is an image of the locals. They arrive. They let all the cows, pigs, goats, and sheep out. They get off the ship and they start burning down all the forests because they want to plant crops. All of a sudden, canoes arrive. They're horrified because it's naked locals. It turns out the local Kennebec people are cannibals. They attack the British, kill them, and eat them. So that's their expedition. One of the leaders, Joshua Montefiore, gets a white flag of truce, which has 0 cultural meaning to the local Kennebecs who don't speak English. He walks up with a white flag as everybody's screaming. They grab him, cut his arm off, and then kill him and eat him in front of everybody. So it's going sideways. People, you can read the quote to see the racism in the quote. Canoes of armed Indians possessing very disagreeable features. Their lips being exceedingly thick, they must have been from Boca. And their noses, did I say that? And their noses remarkably broad and flat. Their complexion was of a coal black, and they had no clothing except for small leather aprons. So there's a massacre on the beach. People rush back to the 3 ships. Some women and children that run slower are captured. Most people are killed and eaten on the beach. Then some women and children are stripped. They're put on the canoes and the Kennebec sail away. People the next morning look out, all the horses, cows, pigs, sheep, everything's killed. They killed all the animals. They destroyed everything they brought ashore, and there's bones everywhere. So they must have come back and dropped off the bones of everybody they ate. So every time some of these Boloma experiment missionaries get off the ship, they get hunted and eaten. Pretty soon, a fatalistic sense overruns the community. They start to call themselves Kennebec chickens, because we're chickens for the local Kennebecs. When we get off the boat, they eat us. Now it's the rainy season, nothing's growing, they run out of food, everybody's sick, they don't know what to do. So they decide to go into the forests on the island, and they shoot a couple of monkeys, and they bring the monkeys back to eat. Unfortunately, in the forest, the monkeys have mosquitoes. There's mosquitoes, including a mosquito called Aedes aegypti. In Latin, it means the unwelcome Egyptian. It is the yellow fever mosquito, and it's a highly potent strain of it. We had no idea where it came from. There was no known cure. So inadvertently, these missionaries brought yellow fever back onto the boats. Over the next several weeks, more and more are eaten. They're dropping dead like flies on the boat. They're starving to death. 2 of the ships sail away. The Henke under Captain Philip Beaver, they refuse to leave. Finally, they say, we've got to leave. Everybody's dying. So they get on board and they start sailing north to go back to England. They're stopped by 2 British warships patrolling the entrance to the Mediterranean. The 2 British warships said, there's French, Spanish, and pirate ships everywhere. You'll never make it. They'll either blow you out of the water, board the ship, steal everything, and kill everybody on board. You can't go back. Can we sail with you 2 for a company escort? No, we're not leaving the area. We're here to protect British shipping interests. Here's the word. You need to sail across the Atlantic and go to the West Indies, the Caribbean. Go to one of the many British-controlled islands, Grenada, Barbados, Jamaica. You can go there and you'll be safe there. Then the next ship that's sailing back, you can sail back with them. The captain says, I don't know how to cross the Atlantic. So both British warships took 2 sailors each and gave them to the Henke. So the 4 sailors and who's alive on the Henke set off across the Atlantic Ocean. Unbeknownst to them, both British warships, within days, everybody dies on the ships. They turn into ghost ships, just floating, unmanned at the entrance to the Mediterranean. So the Henke's sailing west. Now mosquitoes are short-lived, right? It's the female mosquito that passes on yellow fever. So what would happen is mosquitoes breed and spawn in water, stagnant water. To have enough water to cross the Atlantic, they have these huge, crates of water. You've all seen these, that whiskey would come in today or rum would come in. So they're full of water. The mosquitoes would simply lay their eggs there. The next generation doesn't have the yellow fever, but if a female mosquito grows up, bites one of the crew members with yellow fever, then she spreads it to everybody else. She lays her eggs, dies, the next one bites somebody with it. So generation after generation, it keeps spreading it, and people are dying wholesale crossing the Atlantic Ocean. So they arrive in Barbados. Anybody been to Barbados? Lovely place, Tiger Woods, Oprah Winfrey, Simon Cowell. That would be reason not to go, in my opinion. But at any rate, they arrive in Barbados, they dock. A couple of people are still alive, most everybody's sick. And within 2 days of docking, what happens? People at the port start dying wholesale. the authorities realized that it coincided with the Henke. So they kicked them out of Barbados. They resupply, leave Barbados, and they go to St. Vincent. Within 2 days of arriving in St. Vincent, everybody at the port starts to die wholesale. They reprovision, they're kicked out of St. Vincent, and they go to Grenada. You get the point? This is the super spreader incident of the 18th century. They're bringing yellow fever all around. Now, yellow fever also broke out within days in Antigua, Dominica, Jamaica, St. Kitts, and Trinidad. Even though the Henke didn't go there, there would be another ship docked beside the Henke. The mosquito would go on that ship. That ship went to Dominica or Antigua and just took the disease there. So island after island, everybody's dying of this new bizarre disease, and nobody knew what it was. In Grenada, they're not kicked out immediately, so there's a higher death toll as more and more mosquitoes get off the boat. Has anybody been to Grenada? The Spice Island, right? 50% of the world's nutmeg comes from there. And I always go to the spice market and bring spices back for everybody I know. So there's a Fort George, up on the hill overlooking the harbor. It's a pretty formidable fort given the 1700s. It's one of Britain's main garrisons to protect not only that island, but British shipping and British possessions in the West Indies, today the Caribbean. 20 soldiers a day are dying at the fort, 20 a day. So there's so many that die that they can't bury the dead in Grenada. So there's piles of dead all over Grenada, and nobody will touch the dead because of the disease. So it is an apocalyptic. It is like the bubonic plague kind of a thing. Britain is worried about protecting its colonies, so they set sail with 700 reinforcements. 500 of them would die when they arrived in Grenada. This is how lethal this yellow fever was. A lieutenant, Thomas Howard, his diary survived, and here's what he said. It is impossible for words to express the horror that presented itself at this time as bodies were piling up in the port, on the streets, in the fort. And finally, they figured out it might have been the Henke, and they kicked the Henke out. And the Henke sails to Saint Domingue, which is today called Haiti. Saint Domingue. Now, this was a French island, right? You're looking at Toussaint Louverture, the general who led the first Black slave uprising, the first successful Black slave uprising in the Western Hemisphere. So Saint Domingue, Haiti today, is the most important French colony. Why? It produces almost half the world's sugar, rum, molasses. It's a cash cow for sugar-addicted France. It has a massive slave populations per capita, the largest slave population in the world at the time. Because there were so few whites there, and because it was so important for the French economy, the whites there were absolutely brutal. Now, if anybody's really done the deep dive on slavery, the institution of slavery is horrific. I have argued my entire 32 years as a professor, and I teach our class on slavery and civil rights, even though I'm white. I teach our class on Israel and the Holocaust, even though I'm not religious. And I teach our class on women's history, even though I'm a guy. So I cover everything. So I've done a deep dive on slavery for the last 3 decades. It's no textbook does a good job teaching slavery. In fact, about 30 years ago, I did a study. It was a simple study. I literally picked the 20 top selling history books in high schools and the 20 top history books in colleges. And I looked up slavery. Almost all of them had the following sentence. Slaves were brought to America. First off, we should probably say enslaved people. Secondly, is brought the right action word? Brought. It's like, don't have anything to do? How about this cruise ship? We'll have nice warm weather for you, plenty of physical exercise, right? You'll be outdoors. How about slaves were raped, shackled, sold, beaten, commodified, branded? I mean, that would be a better description. So as horrifying as slavery was, the worst place was in Saint Domingue, Haiti. The accounts of it are unimaginable. What slave owners routinely did to instill the fear of God into the hundreds of thousands of enslaved people there, they would periodically bury a slave up to their neck, pour molasses on him, and let bugs just eat him alive. eat them alive. The other thing they did, which was popular, they would get those 55-gallon, like a rum barrel, and they'd put somebody in, cover it up. Then they would drive big nails and stakes through it and roll them down a hill. So you're just being pierced by, this was just a Tuesday in St. Dominguez, so it was brutal. So finally, Toussaint Louverture, the Haitian Napoleon, the Haitian father of independence, comes along and says enough is enough. He and a few thousand enslaved folks escape. They call them the Maroons. Okay? They escape into the mountains. Now, Napoleon and the French don't want to lose this possession, so they send 50,000 French soldiers with artillery horses to put this down. Toussaint Louverture is a wise man. By the way, tragically, he doesn't live through this revolution. The French say they want to parley, so he meets with them and they kill him. So not much of a parley. But he wisely said, we're not going to fight them. We can't fight them. He said, what we're going to do is we're going to hide in the mountains and wait for the rainy season. The rainy season always takes lives. It's known as the sickly season in the Caribbean, in the West Indies. So they hide into the mountains until the rainy season. Well, as the rainy season's ready to start, guess what ship arrives at the port? The Hanky. The Hanky arrives in St. Dominguez to resupply, to re-garrison, and the mosquitoes get out. Almost all 50,000 French soldiers are either sick or dead. Now, I'm not taking anything away from Toussaint Louverture's leadership. He should be applauded for beating the French in power. But part of the reason the French lost Haiti was yellow fever. It wiped out the white population. So they figure out that the Hanky probably unleashed something. So once again, the Hanky's kicked out of yet another port. So the captain says, we're going to sail for Philadelphia, the capital of the United States. And they sail for Philadelphia, and the super spreader event comes to the United States, courtesy of the ship. Crazy, right? So yellow fever strikes Philadelphia in the late summer of 1793. The title of the book, my working title for the duration of COVID, was 100 Days of Terror, because it struck Philadelphia for 100 days, and we did not have a functioning government for 100 days. Everybody was running for their lives or dead. But the publisher preferred America's First Plague. So, you know, and I remember the publisher said to me something to the effect of, when you're David McCullough, you can tell us what to name your book. So there's a long history of pestilence shaping our lives, right? I would argue that pestilence, as much as religion and war and economics, has shaped humanity. Think of some of the diseases, the bubonic plague, as I said, the 1340s, 1/3 of Europe. And it kicked off an anti-Semitic wave of terror as immigrants, Jews, and other groups were blamed for the disease. Has everybody heard of the idea of blood libel? That rabbis used Christian boys' blood for matzah and Passover? This spreads across the continent like wildfire at the time. Cholera, influenza, polio. Think of the impact of things like smallpox, mumps, measles, and chickenpox on the Western Hemisphere. Well over 90% of all the people that lived in North and South America died from disease, not war or Christianity. From disease, smallpox, chickenpox, measles, mumps, and venereal diseases brought by conquistadors and so forth and so on, right? Think of it, Cortez, da Gama, these Spanish and Portuguese conquistadors, they arrived with 40 men. The average height of a conquistador was 4'6". They arrived with 40 men. They arrived with 3 cannons, 4 horses, and they take out the Aztec Empire, Montezuma, with 1 million warriors. Well, it helped that the Aztecs believed that they were gods. But then after you rape enough people, murder enough people, and loot enough, you're no longer a god. But the diseases they brought decimated the indigenous populations. The same with the American Indians. From east to west coast, native peoples died wholesale, not just from the cavalry or cowboys, but from diseases. More recently, look at AIDS, SARS, avian flu, swine flu, COVID. Look at how COVID has changed our lives, right? Everybody in here has missed a funeral or a wedding. Everybody's missed a birthday or a graduation, a bar mitzvah, a bat mitzvah, right? My daughter was a volleyball player from middle school through high school. Her senior year, her volleyball season got canceled. I mean, she'll never get that back, right? I remember at Lynn in 2020 when it hit in March, we have good athletics at Lynn, Division II. We've won something like 26, 27 national championships in Division II. Our women's tennis team is dominant. They literally make the Final Four in Division II every year. Our women's tennis team was undefeated, ranked #1, just won the conference, and had first seed in the tournament, and they canceled the season. I had two of the players were my students. They never got a chance to wear that national championship ring. It was done, right? Kids lost proms, everything. Our economy took a hit. Over 1 million Americans died as we debated whether to drink Clorox, take horse pills, shine bright lights into us, or that it was some kind of hoax by the Chinese to take over our economy. And people died, 1 million Americans. I mean, this is ridiculous, right? And most folks have never been held accountable for the behavior that killed 1 million people. We've all lost friends, not only losing people in COVID, but whether we believe or don't believe in COVID masks or social distancing, we've all lost friendships over it, haven't we? I have. I've had people that dismiss me for wearing a mask. And I'm like, well, part of the reason I'm wearing a mask is because I respect you. And if I have it, I don't want to give it to you. Ooh, Obama. I'm like, oh my God, right? I lost friends. We all did. Think of the medical community, EMTs, nurses. These people were on the front lines, right? They went to work in hospitals. Initially, we didn't know if it was contagious. We didn't know what caused it. And we didn't have a vaccination initially. I mean, those are some brave people. But look at the effects throughout history. The plague of Athens in 430 claimed 1/3 of the Athenian population, including the father of democracy himself, Pericles. So diseases have shaped Western history. The Justinian plague of Emperor Justinian at Constantinople killed 1/5 of the population. Think of that. The Black Death, as I said, 1/3 of Europe. Oh, there's the mask I was telling you about. So they put a cloth at the end here in vinegar. Now, ironically, these outfits actually helped a bit because they were covered gloves, so they weren't touching open wounds. At the time, medicine didn't understand microbiology, right? They didn't understand germs and disease. Doctors operated without washing their hands, right? Then you go have dinner, right? So hygiene wasn't what we know it to be today, everybody. Let's just say that. I've told my students in history classes for over 30 years, if you could take a time machine and go back to any period in history, the first two things you'd realize is, one, the good old days weren't good. And secondly, you couldn't handle the smell. You'd throw up as soon as you met anybody. Because people bathe once, twice, 5 times a year. The custom of having a wedding the first Saturday in May or June was because most communities in Europe had a public bath the first Saturday in May. And people would get in the public bath according to your hierarchy. So if you're the poorest farmer, you're the last person in the bath. Yuck, right? And then after you get a bath, you all get married so you can propagate the species. If the weather's bad or too many people, then you wait and you do a public bath the first Saturday in June. So shaking with your right hand. There's a long European tradition from medieval times, shaking with the right hand. One, the right hand is a hand of offense. This is what you carry your sword, right? Or your spear with. The left hand is the shield. The shield protects the vital organ of the heart, or you can drop it to protect the other vital organ, right? So your right hand's offensive, your left hand's defensive. So if I meet Dr. Michael and offering my right hand, it's showing that I come in peace because I don't have a sword, it's my offensive hand. So that's part of why we shake with the right hand. The other reason, the left hand was for field work, garbage, and cleaning your bottom. The right hand was for eating, touching. So they designated different jobs for different hands. We didn't have hand sanitizer hanging on every wall. We didn't even bathe, right? So hygiene being what it was, these diseases just tore through societies. So the disease in the New World, I said a moment ago, if you think of the native peoples, the Aztecs, the Incans, the Mayans, the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, pick one. Over 90% have died, and it's more than enslavement, religion, war, and Christianity. It's been from disease. It's been probably the most tragic thing to happen to humanity is these mass diseases. And one of them was about to strike Philadelphia and the United States. There's a horrible story about the Zong. That's the ship you're looking at. And this captain, Luke Collingsworth. So this is a slaver. The triangular route, right? The middle passage would sail from Europe to West Africa, pick up slaves, go to the Caribbean or the South, drop off the slaves, pick up cotton, tobacco, and go back to Europe, the route. This ship was sailing across the Atlantic and a disease broke out. We're not sure what it was, but some of the symptoms, it might have been yellow fever. The captain panics and orders every one of the hundreds of slaves below decks thrown overboard. Throws everybody overboard in the middle of the Atlantic. And then when it arrives, I think it was in Charleston, the captain asked for insurance money because he lost his property. So just to give you the horrors of slavery and of course with diseases. That's the mosquito, that's Aedes aegypti up top. There's a cartoon of Yellow Jack. I'm not a sailor, but you all know when ships come into port, they have brightly colored flags, about a foot by a foot, and all the flags mean something. It's like a type of alphabet, right? You can communicate like semaphore, right? Semaphore flags or whatever, but there's flags on the ship. The yellow square is called Yellow Jack. If yellow fever was on board, sailors called it Yellow Jack. You fly the Yellow Jack and nobody comes on board the ship. So Yellow Jack was known to sailors who went to West Africa. So it's Aedes aegypti. It's a particularly gruesome disease, yellow fever. It attacks the red blood cells. You basically bleed black bile from every orifice, mouth down, every orifice, black bile. You vomit, you get chills, severe headaches, numbness and soreness. Eventually, a lot of people lose their minds. Your tongue is so dried and discolored that people eventually suffocate. They can't drink, they can't breathe. Urinary and kidney and liver failure, and telltale, your eyes and your skin turn yellowish. That's how people would identify Yellow Jack. So the disease that was coming to Philadelphia in the United States in 1793 was brutal. There you can see. So Philadelphia, the most important city in the country, America's Athens, right? The medical community, Ben Franklin, the first public library, the first circulating public library, the first sanitation crews. It would have the first public waterworks. This is where the founders met. The Declaration was written, the Constitutional Convention of 1787, the preeminent medical society. So Philadelphia was our biggest and our most important city, and it was about to get hammered through this disease. Again, it was the interim capital for 9 years until Washington was built. The first to die. Here's another lesson from history. Never go to the ports. All the ports were the worst places imaginable, like some Johnny Depp pirate movie, right? Pirates, vagabonds, criminals, sailors. The ports were just murder. We have multiple, I think in 2 of my books, it's about naval history. Law enforcement never even went to the ports. It was like the Wild Wild West. And so it was in Philadelphia. If anybody's been to Front Street, Water Street, Dock Street in Philadelphia, back then they called it Helltown. Helltown. So there was a place called Denny's Boarding House, and the people from the Hanky boarded there along with sailors. So the first deaths were there. That's where doctors discovered it. I read diaries from a Quaker woman named Elizabeth Drinker. And what was great was she wrote every day, all day. Secondly, she was a gossip. So she spilled the beans on everybody. She recorded who's sick, who's dying, whose eyes are yellower. She wrote everything down. And it was also fun because she used ye, thy, all these old English words. She wrote, there has been an unusual number of funerals lately here. It is really an alarming and serious time. 'Tis a sickly sea time now. So it hit Philadelphia. That's Benjamin Rush. He signed the Declaration. He was America's most famous doctor. I mean, a great doctor and public servant, like a Dr. Oz kind of a guy. So taking endorsements for hundreds of products that don't work, right? And telling people to take it. So anyways, Benjamin Rush was America's Hippocrates. He was the father of medicine, without question. It's easy to love Benjamin Rush, and it's easy to hate Benjamin Rush. It's easy to love him because he was a public servant. He was a revolutionary. He was served as a surgeon during the war. I mean, the guy served bravely and selflessly. During this outbreak, when we thought it was contagious, he went into homes of people dying and was treating them. He contracts yellow fever and doesn't stop seeing his patients. I mean, he is brave, brave, brave. He's the first to identify yellow fever as being yellow fever. Ben Franklin gave him old medical books that describe yellow eyes and yellow skin. He said it's yellow fever. That's all he got right. Here's why it's easy to hate Benjamin. By the way, he was also an abolitionist. Here's why it's easy to hate him. He thought God was speaking to him. He was holier than thou, and he thought he was infallible. He would mix up the messenger with the message. If you questioned him, he would destroy you and your career. He took everything personally. He was a narcissist. Everything was about himself. He could be despicable. Benjamin Rush gets everything wrong about yellow fever, but his argument is, how dare any of you question me? I'm Benjamin Rush. He goes to the mayor, to George Washington, and says, there's two ways to treat this. Number one, everything is bodily fluids and phlegms and biles. So the phlegms and body fluids are off kilter. This dates from Hippocrates, BCE. So he said, what we need to do is purge people. He fed people mercury and huge doses of poisons until they had 24 hours a day diarrhea and vomiting. More people died from Rush's treatment than were saved by him. In fact, Hamilton gets into a fight with him. Hamilton says that you're a scourge worse than yellow fever. Dr. Jean de Vicey, a French doctor from Saint-Domingue, Haiti, who had seen tropical diseases, said you're killing people. So that's the first. The second thing is he says it's miasma or miasmata. It's bad air. So it's things like a swamp, rotted coffee, a dead animal. That's what causes diseases. So they went around looking for rotted coffee and things sitting around the city and told people just avoid the coffee. So he gets everything wrong from the beginning. And he literally attacks every other doctor who has a good treatment. There he is. There does not exist a disease for which the goodness of providence is not a remedy, and God has appointed me to discover everything. And he believed this crap. Here's the other problem. He's friends with Thomas Jefferson. So the entire anti-federalist, the Southern slave, no government part, we don't need masks. We'll just pray it away. Rush will take care of it. We shouldn't socially distance. Rush says it's not a big deal. He'll take care of it. It's not real. So he was protected by Jefferson. So of course, Hamilton and Jefferson get into a giant fight over the disease, because Hamilton and Jefferson get into a giant fight over everything. That's the mayor. He was one of the heroes. He appoints committees, get this, to go to homes. They would open up a home and they find a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old who had been alone for a week because the parents were dead and everybody was afraid to go in homes. He created orphanages. He got people to go to the homes. He's got programs to deliver food, to bury the dead. We need to keep the city running. At least half the city vacated the city. It was a ghost town. And when you take the other people dead, there's nobody alive to keep Philadelphia, the capital, running. So he stayed in the city and did his best. Mayor Powell, who was the revolutionary mayor of Philadelphia, who's the most famous mayor, a brilliant, great, like Rudy Giuliani, a great guy. So Mayor Powell, he says, I'll stay with you shoulder to shoulder. These two men stayed, refused to leave. Powell died. Fortunately, Clarkson lived through it. That's Stephen Girard, a Frenchman with one eye, the wealthiest person in Philadelphia. He opened up Bush Hill up on the top, and they took all the people dying up there and gave them medical attention. He hired Jean de Vicey, a doctor from Saint Domingue that fled on the Henke and arrived. They treated people. And Devise wrote that multiple times people would throw a black vial all over Girard as he would be taking care of him. He wouldn't even stop and clean it off. He risked his life. So there were some great acts of heroism. The problem is the two of them didn't have anybody else to bury the dead and run the hospital. There was nobody to run the city. So two black preachers, Absalom Jones and a guy named Richard Allen, these two black preachers said, we can prove that slavery's wrong. We'll run the city. And they asked former slaves to stay in the city. Ironically, the Henke and the whole Galena thing started with an effort to prove that we should end slavery. And it ended up with the heroes of Philadelphia, the people that stayed and ran the city and buried the dead were former slaves who ran the city. So they assisted him. There they are. That's Absalom Jones and Richard Allen. Benjamin Rush and Thomas Jefferson told them not to worry. Africans were immune. They died in equal numbers from the disease. Unfortunately, the conservatives, the anti-federalists, blamed blacks for the disease. Then they blamed immigrants, and then they blamed Jews. They opened up a theater in Philadelphia right before this started, and they said that the theater was the synagogue of Satan. It's Jews in the theater that are corrupting Christian Philadelphia. So there were pogroms against Jews, against blacks, and against immigrants. Here's your lesson from history, everybody. Every time anything happens. So I'm shocked, I'm dismayed, I'm saddened, I'm sickened by the resurgence of race-based hate in Florida and the US, hate toward the gay community, hate toward immigrants, and hate toward the Jewish community. But I'm not completely surprised. It happens whenever there's anything throughout history. Every culture, every country, every period of time, we have the same stuff. So there was basically anti-Jewish pogroms up and down the Eastern Seaboard in 1793. Jews caused them through the synagogue of Satan. The black community, fortunately, both these guys lived through it. They had relatives that died, and a lot of former slaves died. That's a picture of Stephen Girard, the guy that ran Bush Hill. They would ride around with a carriage followed by a wagon, and just like in the medieval times, bring out your dead. They pile up the dead. Then the black community would go bury him, and then he and the other black community would take him up to Bush Hill and try to save lives. So that's the cover of my book, actually. I called it the Physicians' War. You had Benjamin Rush backed by the anti-federalists, Jefferson, the slavers, the conservatives, who didn't believe in anything and were killing people with purging them. And then you had the other side who was arguing for Hamilton enters the fight. And Hamilton and Jefferson go after one another in the newspapers, as they always did. The idea of moving to Philadelphia was a Hamilton-Jefferson dinner conversation and bargain. I've lectured to you before about what I called the most famous dinner in history. It was June 19th, 1790. Hamilton and Jefferson, joined by Madison, had dinner in New York City to solve all the problems one night at dinner. They literally did. And one of them was, where should the capital be? And they agreed Philadelphia until we move it to Washington. Hamilton knew it was going to be Washington because he was more like George Washington's son, right? And Washington already told Hamilton. So Hamilton bargained away Washington, knowing that it was going to be it anyway. So he gave away that which was already done and then used it to leverage everything else. Jefferson realized that Hamilton duped him on it, and he wrote a letter to George Washington saying it was the worst moment of my political life when he realized Hamilton duped him on everything. So Hamilton enters the papers and says Rush and Jefferson are killing more people than they're saving. And Hamilton advocated a radical treatment. Why don't we have people rest, hydrate, use lemonade, shower, hygiene, and just relax, see if you get better that way. So, and of course, Jefferson and Rush attack Hamilton. Then Hamilton is so voracious and so aggressive with his argument, it's starting to get some traction. People are realizing Rush is killing everyone. Then Hamilton contracts yellow fever. And so does his wife, Eliza. They almost died. Jefferson, Madison, and the anti-federalists used that to discredit Hamilton. You see, he got it. Hamilton has to flee to New York to save his life. Jefferson and them are even hoping Hamilton dies. It was ridiculous. The hate that was going on, it was pathetic. So you can see the belief was It's an imbalance in blood, phlegm, and a miasma or miasmata, which is foul air. So real quickly, just to show you anti-Black, anti-Jew, anti-immigrant feelings, finger pointing, the two parties harden, people aren't speaking to one another, people are dying wholesale. It spreads up and down the eastern seaboard. Towns are putting together vigilante patrols, and anybody on the roads, they're attacking or grabbing them, thinking that you're coming from Philadelphia. We had utter lawlessness. George Washington has to do the unthinkable. He has to tell the federal government to evacuate. So for 100 days, we don't have a government. The Congress, we'd be better off without a Congress. But back then, the Congress, the federal government, the entire military, they fled. Washington went back to Mount Vernon. People were begging him to leave, as everybody's, Dolly Madison's first husband, Todd, died, and she married after this, James Madison. Her son died, everybody's dying. You can see some of the anti-Semitic, the preachers were just going wild with it. I'll just close now by saying Washington vacated. He left Henry Knox in charge. Henry Knox was his artillery general from the Revolution and the Secretary of War. Henry Knox is the only one back running the government. All the employees died but him. So he writes to Washington saying, I'm the federal government. I'm going to die, so I'm leaving. He goes to New York and they capture him and they lock him up in a prison. They call it a quarantine. Henry Knox can't govern. He's stuck in a prison. So this is what happens. Washington and Jefferson and Hamilton get into another argument. Washington says, we've got to return to Philadelphia to govern. We're vulnerable to an international attack, right? We have to have a government. Ultimately, what they found out was that there were no new deaths recorded at the Bush Hill Hospital. The disease had finally mitigated. Why? The fall frost. It wasn't medicine, it wasn't done, it was a freezing spell. They had an early fall frost and that killed all the mosquitoes up and down the eastern seaboard. Washington realizes there's no one there, so Washington says we need to bring Congress back. Jefferson, with this very narrow read of the Constitution, says the Constitution doesn't give us the right to go back, so we can't. Washington says I need to call the government back. Jefferson says the Constitution doesn't give the president the right to do it. Washington says, what are we going to do? So he tells Hamilton, solve it. Hamilton looks at it, shows Jefferson, says, where in the Constitution does it say we can't? Doesn't say we can, but it doesn't say we can't. So George says, that's good enough for me. Washington gets on his horse alone and rides into Philadelphia. Nods to everybody. They see he's in Philadelphia, he comes back and says, I didn't die, time to go back to Philadelphia. So people all up and down the eastern seaboard went back to work. The federal government followed Washington. As Jefferson, Madison, and the Southerners are bitching about the whole thing, Washington says, I'm going to Philadelphia, join me or not, and everybody did. So that's what saved government. In closing, political parties formed as a result of this. Countless deaths. As a percentage, it's the worst disease to ever hit the United States. I estimate at least 10% of the capital city died, maybe 20%. A lot of the blacks that died, they didn't record the deaths. You know where Independence Hall is in Philadelphia, right? Behind it is a public square with some beautiful 200-year-old trees. That public square was all dug up. It's a giant mass grave. They put a couple thousand bodies in there and just covered it up because they didn't know what to do with everyone. All the cemeteries were full. So when you walk around, you're on top of bones. The first public waterworks was built when this ended by Benjamin Latrobe in Philadelphia. Everybody realized we need safe water. Public health, after this was over, they advocated cleaning the streets. People should start bathing. They ordered everybody to do your clothes, your laundry on a regular basis. Yeah. The US Capitol debate, people wanted to move back to New York. Some people said we should stay in Philadelphia. Then everybody said, no way are we staying in Philadelphia anymore. So this allowed us to go to Washington, DC. Population shift, a good percentage of the eastern seaboard moved inland and went to rural areas, hilltops, to get away from the low-lying coasts and the disease. The Atlantic slave trade, they start debating the end of it not because they cared, but because they're worried about another fever outbreak. So when the slave trade ends about 20 years later, it's in part over the worry of disease and massive death toll. What happened to it? Anybody heard of Walter Reed? Yeah, that's him at the bottom. Spanish-American War, 1898. Spain has 10 times the number of soldiers that we do in places like Cuba, the Philippines, Puerto Rico. We have a small group of men and we annihilate them. How? Most of the Spanish were dead or dying of yellow fever. We lost more men in the Spanish-American War to yellow fever than the Spanish gunshots. Yeah, yellow fever wiped everybody out. Walter Reed was there. He noticed it. He and a colleague both purposely infected themselves with it by Aedes aegypti. They put their arms in a little. They both got yellow fever. His colleague died. He lived, but he proved where it comes from. So a couple of decades later, the guy up top, Dr. Taylor, developed the vaccination. Now we know where it comes from. Now you can get vaxxed. However, globally, 200,000 people still get it every year, and 30,000 a year still die from yellow fever, mostly in Central Africa, even though we have a vaccine. Remember, it's not just having a vaccine, it's getting it there, getting biomedical and farm companies to give it, and telling local people to take it. My God, we wouldn't get vaxxed here in the US, right? So it's still a scourge. Philip Freneau, anybody heard of the revolutionary poet? He wrote all the great poems about the revolution. He wrote a poem about Philadelphia. Hot, dry winds forever blowing, dead men to the graveyards going, constant hearses, funeral verses, oh, what plagues, there is no knowing. Doctors raving and disputing, death's pale army still recruiting, what a pother, one to the other, some are writing, some are shooting, nature's poisons here collected, water, earth, and air infected, oh, what a pity such a city was in such a place ever erected. And that's the book that just came out this week. All right, thanks everyone. Next time I come here, we'll do something really light and funny instead of a pandemic. Oh, what do you want to talk about?
Does DeSantis here allow you to put that book in the?
If DeSantis hears about this book, I might be in trouble. Yeah, I hope he bans it. It'll be good for sales. But I'd be in good company because the Diary of Anne Frank is on the chopping block in Florida. Yes, it is. Also, J.D. Salinger, Catcher in a Rye, Kurt Vonnegut, Judy Blume. So anyways, yeah, I hope my book does get banned. So anyway, it's factual. It's factual. It's something like 500 primary sources, 1,000 footnotes. So it's, I did my homework. Yes.
So it seems to me that history repeats itself. I've been listening to you for years now, and you talk about things, and it reminds me of today, and so does everybody else. So maybe if we just hold tight, they'll die off.
So first off, thanks for coming to yet another lecture. But yeah, history repeats itself. George Santayana, right? Basically, Santayana's quip was, if you don't learn the lessons of history, you'll be doomed to repeat them. And we always do. Our military always prepares for the last war, not the next war. Disease after disease, the same thing happened, the same thing happens. Our politics repeat itself. Fear mongering, blame mongering, scapegoating, pointing fingers at immigrants, gays, Jews, Latino. It doesn't stop. You know, I always joke and say, historians are prophets in reverse. You know, we figure out the past. People think we know the past, it's the future we don't know. I think they're both largely unknown. But I always say that I'm the rare exception in that I'm kind of fun and upbeat. Most historians are drinkers and depressed because you realize what humanity does to one another. After 47 books like this, it does get difficult. But yeah, we never learn the lessons. It's an indictment of human nature. It's an indictment of our leadership, every culture, every country, every period of time. Don't we as a world take 2 steps forward to only take 2 steps backward? You know, women get the right to vote. Now we don't want to give them health care or reproductive rights. And now several southern states with Republican legislatures are trying to do away with no-fault divorce. Birth control is under attack by some on the right. It's surreal. We take 2 steps forward with women's progress. You know, women make up half medical school classes. Majority of people now in law school, veterinary school, right? Women are making great gains, and as we do that, we go backward. Every generation has to deal with the same anti-Semitic issues. And if you don't teach this generation, we're going to skip one and we won't learn the lessons. Never forget, never again needs to be taught over and over and over and always. We're a nation of immigrants. Everyone in here either came from someplace else, your parents did or your grandparents, and you all did great things, your family, for this country, and yet we're militantly anti-immigrant. My children are half Latino. Their mother was from Argentina and Ecuador. And yet, here we are. So it's depressing, it's sad. And I know it's killing me to watch what's happening in my country. And it is all of you too. Every day I get up and I go, oh no, right? And I just read the news and then I'm getting gas and some guy screams at me, Watson, F you, I hope you die, or making America great. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm getting gas in my hybrid. Gets better mileage than your truck, by the way. F you, hope you die. I'm like, oh my God, I'm at gas in Delray Beach, getting gas at Delray Beach. So it's really, how many people have lost friends? Even here at Gleneagles, this place is paradise. By the way, good food, good cookies. It's surreal what's happening. Yes, sir. Good point. A book should come out on social media. I have a book on August 1st coming out on the British burning Washington on August 24th, 1814. So I'll come back and talk about that. It's a good story because as the British under General Robert Ross, 4,500 of the best, today we call them special forces. This is the army that beat Napoleon. As they're marching to Washington, we get every available man, basically 16 to 60, and hand them a musket. And they run like cowards. General Robert Ross said the Americans ran like sheep before wolves. We ran, and they marched embarrassingly unopposed in the city and burned it. I mean, it's a horrible, our capital was burned. But it's a story about a young government clerk named Stephen Pleasanton, who tells his Colonel Magruder, I'm leaving, I need to go back to the Library of Congress. If you do, you'll be court-martialed. All day, for 3 days, I'm leaving. You're gonna have to I'm leaving. You're okay, I'm out, you're gonna have to court-martial me. Finally, Colonel Magruder says, leave. I just don't care, just leave, you're driving me nuts. Pleasanton rushes back, he saves the Declaration, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and he puts them on a cart that he stole, couldn't find a horse, it's pulled by an ox, clumping with 2 wheels. There's 2 roads into the city. He's on one road, he looks at sunset on the other road and a dust cloud from the thousands of British boots marching in. He barely makes it out of the city, risked his career, his life to save documents. So now I'm writing a book now on the final days of the Civil War. Some crazy stuff that happened at the very end of the Civil War. The final battles, the final madness of the Civil War. So that's what we're, I'm not a social media expert. I'm not very technological. I have to get my son and daughter to do all my tech for me, or the students to do my tech. I can do Zoom and that's about it. I can make a PowerPoint. If you notice, none of my PowerPoints are fancy because I don't buy them. By the way, most professors buy a service. Yeah, there's companies that give you your PowerPoints and lectures. I do all my own. That's why they're so cheap. Simple. But that would be a great book, and we need a national dialogue on that. I just don't know enough to jump in on it. I know a lot more about the Civil War, so that's low-hanging fruit for me. Beyond that, I'm thinking about, which I'm writing now, the book on the Civil War. I'm thinking about a book on the trial of the 1700s. That is John Adams defending the British from the Boston Massacre. So it's a twist and turns. It's better than the OJ trial. So, yeah.
In your research, did you come across any information about the Jews coming through Savannah, the ship from London, was, I guess, around Charleston, and then came to Savannah, and was not going to let them in. And there was a yellow fever outbreak. Dr. Nunez was on board, and
So I didn't, that's not in my book. I'm not an expert on it by any stretch. I've heard of it. Jews went, there was by the way, there was a viable Jewish population in Charleston and in Savannah. And these were two of the biggest slave ports along with Mobile. And there was a Jewish population there. It's not that most Jews were slavers, no. Jews were merchants, shippers, spoke other languages, financiers, craftsmen, people that were of help to folks, and communities like that needed them. Were there anti-Semitic efforts to prevent Jews from settling in those cities? Oh yeah. In fact, I wrote a book 2 years ago about the Civil War. It's called Escape. It's about the biggest prison break during the Civil War from Richmond. Richmond was the Confederate capital. And I got all these diaries of Southerners that all fled to Richmond, which is a great city, by the way. Love Richmond. All these folks fled to Richmond because they were all this fear, the Union's going to come and rape our women, and no. And the diaries, almost all of them said, there's some streets in Richmond that are weird because they have these strange immigrant names like Cohen and Feldman and Feinstein and there's horrible people that came here and are desecrating our city. Yeah. So there was a lot of anti-Semitic nonsense in all these major cities in the South. Philadelphia had a large Jewish population. This is where the great Haim Solomon, everybody, the Jewish financier of the revolution, Solomon was in Philadelphia. So yeah, there was a Jewish population there as well. But no, I didn't cover that at all in the book.
Dr. Watson. They kind of said, well, let's not the Nunez off, treat the people. And Savannah, of course, and Nunez said, no, everybody comes off the ship.
Everybody gets off the ship, not just me. Yeah, I've heard it.
Where all the windows, it's built on the Christian church, and all the windows are Spanish names, Portuguese names, because.
They were Sephardic. So there were Sephardic Jews that went there. Yeah, let me get them. I'll get them in the order of the song. 1, 2, 3.
I just want to know what's going to happen to teaching your slavery course.
Yeah, teaching. So yeah, Florida has become an international laughingstock in education. We are facing a serious K through 12 teacher shortage, especially in STEM, especially in special ed, counseling, and so forth and so on. Nobody wants to come to Florida now to teach. We're going to be facing a professor shortage. First off, our salaries are horrendous in Florida. My joke is always, thank God for Mississippi, because we're only 49th in professorial salaries. And we can say, we make more than they do at Ole Miss. But you can't teach African-American studies. Now they're threatening, you can't have women's studies, Jewish studies, Holocaust studies. No public university can have a diversity or equity initiative. Yeah, it's really getting crazy. I'm at a private university, so there's nothing that affects us yet. We're okay. 6 weeks ago on Thursday, so now it's 6.5 weeks ago, I had breakfast with a couple of university presidents in Florida. And the purpose of the breakfast was at Lynn, we're launching a Holocaust genocide initiative. Very aggressive. It's great. You're going to love it. Anybody go to my March 1st program on the art, music, and poetry and the Holocaust? Thank you. I hope you liked it. And we got lots more coming. Anyway, so I was representing Lynn and meeting with these other administrators to say they have Holocaust programs, we do. They have genocide programs, we do. We're starting a refugee program. So if they want to bring their students to my programs, fine. Can my students go to yours? Fine. That was the purpose of our breakfast. So we meet, and the one university president, as we're ready to order, looks at all of them and says, quote unquote, did you get the decree this week? So this is 6.5 weeks ago. And they all go, oh my gosh, this is surreal. We can't do it. It can't be done. I never thought I'd live to see this. This is fascist Italy. This is Nazi Germany in the 30s. So I'm sitting there going, wait, I'm not a president of the university. I'm just a professor. What decree? They got a memo from the governor telling every state university and state college, you must make a list of every time your campus has content dealing with racism, sexism, and anti-Semitism. Could be a lecture, a test on the question, or a movie. And you must then justify why you would teach it.
So what kind of
So if I'm teaching World War II and somebody raises their hand about the Holocaust, do I have to get permission from Tallahassee? Could I get fired? Is it something we have to report? If I'm teaching the Battle of Gettysburg and somebody asks me about slavery, well, of course, I'll answer everything because history is more important to me than I'll get a job somewhere else, I'll leave. But imagine states, first off, there's no way to list everything you talk about anti-Semitism, racism, and sexism. So if I require students to read Elie Wiesel's Night, I need to get permission from Tallahassee. Is that going to be banned too? It's surreal. So that was 6.5 weeks ago on a Thursday morning. And what's happening beyond that, I don't know. I told everybody to dig in and don't comply. They said it's easy for you, you're a professor. We have budgets, we have jobs, we have boards. Our board could be overthrown, we could be fired, our budget could be. So I don't know what's going to happen. Never in a bazillion years would I have thought that any of this would have happened, but here we are.
So what can we do?
What you can do is tell everybody you know what's happening. What you can do is everybody can join clubs, everybody can write letters, everybody can go on social media and just be loud, loud, loud. Here's your lesson from history. When Franco in Spain started attacking journalists, people were quiet and said, oh, it can't get worse. And then guess what? It got a whole lot worse. When Salazar in Portugal started burning books, people said it can't get worse. And guess what? It got a whole lot. When Mussolini in Italy started rounding people up and imprisoning, all these dictatorial autocrats, they don't stop. They don't become sane. They don't become empathetic. They don't become humane all of a sudden on a Thursday. They just keep going and going and going. And if no one's held accountable, and if we all get rolled, and if we're quiet, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. Be loud, loud, loud. If I was a lawyer, I would file a lawsuit every day of the week on everything a certain person does or says. You know, think about it. A couple of weeks ago, the governor said that all middle school and high school girls must track their menstrual cycles and report it to Tallahassee. But guess what? He backed off of that in 3 days. You know why? Dozens of lawsuits were filed. Florida was going to be shut down. So he had to back off of it. Why? Because people got active. If you put a frog in boiling water, it jumps out. If you put it in water and gradually heat it, the frog stays in and boils itself. You gotta be loud. I mean, I promise, ma'am, and then we'll go to that. Yeah.
Oh, but maybe you answered my question. The question is that based on all the knowledge you have studied and know about history and evolution and whatever has transpired in the universe, how do you see never mind me, but the culture going forward of this universe, based on everything that you know so very well?
How do I see things going forward?
Where are we going?
Well, to try to take a bite out of that, that's like biting into an elephant, right? But just real quickly, what I would say is I was always an optimist. I always said no matter how bad things are, the tanks don't roll out into the streets in the US. No matter how bad elections were, we always had a peaceful and civil transfer of power. Not anymore, right? So I become a pessimist. Tens of millions of Americans don't believe in science, evolution, COVID, vaccinations. We don't believe in civility. Tens of millions of Americans don't care about the rule of law, the integrity of the Constitution. We're a laughingstock around the world. We withdrew from UNESCO, the UN Human Rights Council. We withdrew from the Paris Climate Accords, the Singapore Agreement to keep our eye on Kim Jong-un. We withdrew from the INF, which was the global community keeping an eye on Putin. We shredded treaties to support the world's worst dictators, and nobody seemed to give a crap. So I become a pessimist. We need to fight. This is our country. Do it for your kids, your grandkids. I have 2 children. I'm worried. I also see every day on campus, and I lecture at about a half dozen universities a year around the country, from Ivy to community colleges. I go all over the place, and I see that the American students are getting whooped by the students from around the world. All the best students are from Europe, the second best students are from Latin America, the third best students are from the Middle East. The American students are always at the bottom of the heap. I can almost tell you what grades everybody's going to get in my classes at the beginning if you tell me where they're from. My first 2 rows in my class are all students from Europe and Latin America. They're dressed well, and they're sitting there with good posture waiting for me to arrive. 10 minutes into the lecture, the American students shuffled in with their pants down their ass. They forget to bring their iPad. They forgot their presentation was today. And you just go, where do we even begin, right? Something's happening. I don't know. It's the generation of Kardashians and Kanyes and Biebers and Charlie Sheens and reality TV. And yeah, and we've lost our sense of civility. We've lost our sense of decency. I have to tell my students, if a female student comes in, I ask one of the guys, would you get up and give her your chair? I'm like, okay, I'm not asking now. Get up and give her your chair. And afterwards I say, didn't you learn that? I mean, you know, every morning, you can ask my students, if you meet anybody from Lynn, I walk in and say, good morning, class. And by the 3rd day, then they all say, good morning, Dr. Watson. First day, it's good morning, class. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Good morning. I said, when you get a job at the law firm, if the senior partner walks in and says, good morning, you say, good morning, Mr. Greenspan. Good morning, sir, right? Handshake. I always I stop them and go, whoa, 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 we're going to do that handshake again. You're going to look me in the eye and give me a handshake. You know, it's like, hey, Dr. Watson. No, I'm not your bro. You can do, if we're playing basketball, give me that. If it's in class, no, right? So I don't know. I become very pessimistic, and the problem is there's no silver bullet. It's not just one thing or another. It's a lot of problems. Let me take like 3 more and we'll end it. 1, 2, 3. Okay, 4. Real quick, real quick. I need to go to my right at some point.
So my father was a teenager in Poland when Hitler got into power.
Your father is a teenager in Poland in the 30s.
Yes.
Wow.
And then in 1939, he was a young man. He ended up running to Russia. He saved himself. Nobody listened to him. While he was watching Hitler doing all these things, he was warning people. Nobody was listening to him. And I was trying to tell as many people as I could when what's his name was running for president. I lost a lot of friends. Would you say that half of us elected this man? How much of it is greed? Just plain greed.
Well, yeah, I don't know. Is it just greed why people vote for certain? I'm always dismayed when you talk to people and ask them why they vote. People of both political parties and independents. I like their last name. Oh, he gets me. Oh, I just think he's cool. That's not why you vote for someone. You vote for someone for policies, right? But I mean, most Americans are so utterly uninformed. My maternal grandmother, her maiden name was Carter. It was changed from Carlos to Carter because people were racist. She voted for Jimmy Carter because he had the same name. I mean, but people vote. So I don't know. I mean, remember Schwarzenegger was elected. Jesse Ventura was elected. I mean, Kanye could get elected. I mean, Kim Kardashian could be president. So this is where we are. Let me get these last couple quick ones.
Comment on what's happening at the university and
New college in South Florida.
and where do you see that trend going that's going to end Lynn?
Yeah, so people are realizing you can, there's an unused until now clause that allows the governor to replace board members. People just didn't do it historically because it's not ethical. But today, knock yourself out. So we're seeing it in school boards around the country. You see that school board has 5 people in a county. Christian evangelicals get 3 seats and are no longer teaching evolution in the schools. Good luck getting those kids into college. They're not teaching science, right? You're seeing mothers against fill in the blank taking over schools and banning books. You just saw a teacher get in trouble for showing a Disney movie after the test so the kids could relax. Because one mother had a canary because the Disney movie, I don't know, was woke or I don't know. I showed my kids lots of Disney movies. They were fine. I think today politics is war and it knows no bounds. We never thought people would have had a hostile takeover of an educational board and fill it with people that were commentators for Fox instead of PhDs and university presidents and policy analysts. Anybody can get on the board these days. And the students at the new college had their own graduation. They refused to go. They raised money, alumni donated money, and they boycotted the graduation event because it was the guy, the Surgeon General, that didn't believe in COVID, and students boycotted their. So these days, the commencement speaker is a big controversy. I've given 2 commencement addresses. I don't know that I'll do it again because somebody's going to threaten to sue no matter what you say, right? So yeah, this is the new battleground. Yeah, and
Yes.
then I'll end up.
Can you comment on DeSantis and Disney?
DeSantis and Disney. Here's what I would say. Disney's the state's biggest employer. Disney brings billions of dollars in. Disney has the Reedy Creek Development Authority, which means they run their own roads, their own water, their own sewage. If the governor got what he wanted and took that over, the people of Central Florida would see their taxes quadruple because they'd have to cover all the water. Can you imagine how much water Disney uses? How much electricity, the garbage collection? Orange County, the city of Orlando could not, they would have a blackout. There's no way they could. So if he got what he wanted, the people of Central Florida would be bankrupt trying to provide the sewage, the water. But what we see is this has more to do than just with some anger over Disney. It goes to a deeper, like 3rd grade bully mentality. If I can't do this, then you know what? I'm going to shut the monorail down. Who talks like, you know what? I'm going to build prisons all around your property. You know what? All the roads leading into Disney, he wants to make them high tolls, so nobody can go to Disney. The Bright Line, we're not going to put a stop for you to get off. And I mean, this is, so what did Disney just do? We're going to take $1 billion investment, 2,000 jobs in Florida, we're taking it. The next step I'm hearing from state legislatures is Disney invests hundreds of millions of dollars in Florida in companies, right? Stock, everybody, right? Exxon buys stock, Kroger buys stock, Winn-Dixie buys stock, Nike buys stock. Disney may just take all the money to invest in the state of Florida and say, bye. Now, they're not going to uproot the parks because that's impossible, but just not invest in anybody dealing with Florida. And how many other businesses were looking at Florida for a place to relocate, but now if they have a female CEO or if they provide same-sex benefits, are they going to get in trouble? And it's not just the governor, 100% of his party in the state house and state senate backed him on it. So it was unanimous. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you may like the mouse, you may not like the mouse, but to declare war against the largest employer and act like a 3rd grade, you know what? If I don't get the pitch, I'm taking the ball, the bat, and the glove, and I'm going home. Nobody gets to play baseball today. I'm leaving. That's not public service. Let me get a last question.
The things you mentioned today, I think there's one that you probably thought of but didn't mention.
Go ahead.
Is vote.
Is what?
Vote.
Vote. Yeah, sure. Vote. Yeah, vote. Stay active. You're all stakeholders. You all have kids, grandkids, nieces, nephews. You're all neighbors. You all have someone you love. This is the stakes are high. We always said it couldn't happen here. Read history. It's happened everywhere. So why should we be any different? It has happened here. We had the KKK running amok. We had slavery for the first 100 and some years of our history. We had the Birch Society. We had the Know Nothings. It was a political party dedicated to, it was anti-Jew, anti-Catholic, anti-woman, anti-immigrant. The Know Nothing Party at one point. In the 1920s and 30s, the most revered, successful Americans were all raving anti-Semites. Henry Ford, Father Charles Coughlin, Lucky Lindbergh, all the most beloved Americans. Hitler even wrote in Mein Kampf saying that Henry Ford was a hero of his. Hitler told the Nazis that America is a great place to look at because we have slavery, we committed genocide against American Indians, and we hate Jews. So Father Charles Coughlin had a listenership, the Midwestern radio priest, of 30 million listeners in the 20s and 30s. Think about that. There are prominent news outlets today that would love to have numbers like that. Yeah, 30 million back then, which means he dominated radio, and he raised money to create America First organizations all around the country. They armed themselves, and he was, for when he would tell them to kill Jews and immigrants. They were ready to go. It was going to be a war. And Coughlin was dominating the radio with this kind of stuff. It was surreal. The motto of those groups, by the way, was called, "They're going to make America great again." So we've had a history. So on that note, I'm sure this is the last time I'll ever be at Gleneagles. So I wish you all the best, and good to see everybody. Thanks. These are my opinions, not Kenny's.
Don't you think that we can bring us down? We have to bring down to Sanders.
I hope so. I
They're
mean,
multi-billionaire.
I know. Well, I mean, it's starting by them pushing back, by them hiring lawyers, by them suing him, and by them saying they're taking $1 billion program out of Florida. At some point, a lot of his supporters and state legislatures are liable to say,